Chinese-based router vulnerabilities, how to secure or harden a TP-Link router, or any router for that matter. Let's get into some security. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much once again joining me for tea time. Today we have a little bit of fireside. I hope you're joining me with your cup of tea, maybe a cup of coffee, hanging out, talking tech, talking photo, talking video. Today is a technology day. We'll be talking about vulnerabilities and how to harden, how to lock down your router. I did a video just before the holiday about TP-Link and their possible ban in the United States. That's going to be happening very soon, within the next couple of weeks, where TP-Link routers will no longer be able to be sold in the US due to possible backdoors and other vulnerabilities. So in the comments below the last video, a lot of you guys asked me to show you how to harden or better secure a TP-Link router, or any router for that matter, in a video. And that's what this video is all about. Some of you guys are going to say, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of my TP-Link altogether. Others are going to say, well, let's just harden it for now. And then when we have the cash, we can go and buy a better router, a more expensive router, a router, let's say, that is based in the US and not in China. Now, I did have a couple of people say that, no, you're wrong, that TP-Link is not a Chinese router. They're out of wherever, and it's not the case. It is a Chinese-based router. I did some research on it. It was basically created by two brothers back in 1996, and they were obviously from China, and that's where the whole thing originated. Their headquarters are, matter of fact, in Sichuan, China. So, yes, it is a Chinese company that has other subsidiaries, let's say, throughout the globe, but the actual company and the majority, the great majority of their routers are built in China. So that being said, this is where the vulnerabilities come in, and this is one of the reasons why the US is saying, well, we might need to ban it. Now, I was reading an article. I'm just going to read this little bit to you because it gives you an exact understanding of why we're doing today what we're doing. It starts out by saying, as a company, it was founded primarily in China. Like I said, TP-Link, like other Chinese corporations, operate under the legal framework of the People's Republic of China, or the PRC, which includes laws and regulations that mandate cooperation with the Chinese government, including the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party. Very important. So what exactly is the obligation to the CCP by TP-Link? It's a good question, right? National Intelligence Law. Introduced in 2017, the law requires Chinese companies to assist and cooperate with state intelligence work. This has raised concerns globally about data privacy and security, especially for companies like TP-Link that deal with networking equipment. Absolutely. Cybersecurity law. This law further compels companies to provide technical support to public security organs and state security organs for the protection of national security or investigation of criminal activity. Now, whatever that criminal activity is up to them to decide. Data location. This is important too. Chinese law also requires data to be stored in China, which can facilitate government access to the data. So now, what are the concerns? And this is what we were talking about from the top. It says security risk. The U.S. has expressed concerns over the security implications of using Chinese-made network equipment like TP-Link. There's a fear that the devices like routers could be used for espionage or cyber attacks, either through built-in backdoors or by being exploited after deployment. And I've talked to you guys about this in the last video. It's not necessarily a backdoor being created and placed in the firmware, for example, or even in the hardware in one of the prompts. It could be simply just a insecurity that they know about that they just leave open and then tell the CCP, yeah, you know, if you go over to this port, we're going to leave that port open and you can just kind of tunnel in through there. Obviously, this is just pure speculation, but this is the fear. And this is one of the reasons why Huawei and a few other corporations are banned or at least limited here in the US for the exact same reasons. So anyways, today we're going to get into unleashing the fortress, so to speak, right? Literally fortifying or hardening your router. Once again, it does not need to be a TP-Link. Everything that I tell you today can be used on any router, okay? And it should be used on every router that you have. Once again, you need to be able to secure your data, because if someone breaks in, well, now they have access to your entire network. And that means every device on that network, if certain things aren't shut down. I'll get into that in just a second also. So let's start out with the administration password. When you first get into the router, the password is usually like admin and the username is admin. Well, you need to change that right away. Now I'm going to tell you that you go into system tools or administrative tools, and then you go in there and you change your password. Change it into something that's alphanumeric, something that's longer, that has uppercase, lowercase, letters, also numbers, and possibly some punctuation. That helps a lot, because what that does is it makes it very difficult to brute force into it by testing passwords, right? So you want to make it a little bit more difficult to get in. That's number one. Now the next thing, I put this in this list at the bottom, but I moved it to the top because I think this is so important, and people do this all the time or don't do it all the time. And that is change the IP address of your router. Now, there's multiple reasons to do it, because many of the routers that are out there in the market today, they all use 192.168.1.1, for example. And let's say the majority of them use that, 192.168.1.1. Well, the hackers know that also, right? So they're going to test that IP address immediately along with others. But that is the first and foremost. So what you want to do is you want to log into your system tools once you get in there, or it could be in your administrative area. Once again, it depends on your router. And once you get in there, you want to change that number from 192.168.1.1 to 192.168, let's say 21.1. Right? So what that's going to do is it's going to put every device on a new network. Instead of the one network, 1.10, 1.20, 1.50, 1.150. Now the network is going to be 21.50, 100, 150. Now when you do this, bear in mind, everything changes. All of those devices that are currently in your home are going to be like, hey, I don't have internet connection anymore. That's okay, because they all have what is called a TTL setting, or a time to live, for those DHCP requested IP addresses for your LAN. So after X amount of minutes, it's going to just request a new IP address and it's going to be back on the network. You could also reboot your devices and it'll immediately poll for a new IP address also, but it's just not important unless it's something you need immediately. So just bear that in mind, because you are changing the network numbering system, let's call it. So once again, 192.168.21.1. Sounds good to me, right? That works. Now the next thing is Wi-Fi fortification. This is important also. Wi-Fi is usually how the majority of hackers get onto your network. Some of them will plug directly in, but for the most part, they're going to be accessing it through Wi-Fi. Now in the past, the Wi-Fi security was WPA2. Well, now they have WPA3, which is let's say a tighter security. All right, it's a little bit better. So my recommendation is, if you have an older router that's using WPA2, get a new one. All right, get a new router that uses WPA3. Now the next thing you want to look at is firmware. You need to keep your hardware up to date. How is that done? By updating your firmware on a regular basis. Now you can set it up to automatically update the firmware. I just don't like that, because if I'm doing something, let's say I'm doing a live show or something, and all of a sudden it starts updating the firmware, well, that's a problem, right? And then it reboots and all the rest of the stuff and I'm out. No. So for me, I want to update manually. I will head over to TP-Link's website, take a look at the list of firmware, and if there's a newer one than the one that I'm currently using, I'm going to download it. Very simple. This is not hard to do. You're going to go into your TP-Link or other router and look for firmware upgrade, for example, or it might be an administrative or settings or whatnot, but firmware upgrade in TP-Link. You go in there, you're going to give it the file that you downloaded from TP-Link's website and say, yeah, go ahead and do the upgrade. It's going to take maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then it's going to reboot the router with the new firmware. During that time of the update, do not turn anything off. Do not touch it. Let it do its thing. You don't want to end up bricking your router, and that could happen if the firmware update doesn't finalize properly. So leave it alone until it reboots and you're back on. Very simple. Now, the next thing is network isolation, or as I call it, security through obscurity. All right. You want to segregate your network as much as possible. You want others outside to see the network and only be able to get into certain portions of it. And to segregate a network, you basically use VLANs, or virtual local area networks, VLANs. And to do so, it's pretty easy. You just simply go into your administrative tools there and you go into guest networking and set up a guest network, or set up a new VLAN. You call it whatever you want to call it, label it with a specific ID, and off you go. And then, once again, segregate your traffic based on each VLAN. For example, if you don't want any of your IoT or your Internet of Things to be able to touch or access your PC, well, have it on a different VLAN, or virtual local area network. Very simple to do. It gets in a little bit deeper as you put a lot of rules into those LAN networks, but for the most part, it's very easy to segregate. A perfect example of this is, let's say you have guests that come over to your home, or maybe you're running a business, but you want to allow your patrons to have Wi-Fi access, and you don't want that specific LAN network, even though they're accessing through Wi-Fi, you don't want that network to be the same network that your money is sitting on, or in the case of a home, where your normal traffic will be. So you would set up a VLAN specifically for guests, and that is it, or patrons that come to your store or shop. And that, once again, will segregate that traffic. I like doing this segregation based on, for example, IoT, Internet of Things type of traffic. The reason behind that is a lot of the IoT devices, they have access from device to device to device without having to authenticate. Once they're in the network, they don't need to authenticate anymore, and they can then propagate malware or other problematic information, let's say, throughout your network. Whereas if you segregate them into a small VLAN, they can't get out of that. It's almost like being trapped inside of a box. And that's what a VLAN does. So it's something to look into. I'm not going to get too deeply into it, but it is very important. The other thing is firewall and security features. You want to go and head into your security area of your router. Make sure your firewall is turned on. This is very important because firewalls allow let's say a hard brick wall for data to bounce off of. You want to turn on SPI and DOS protection. SPI stands for Stateful Packet Inspection, and then DOS stands for Denial of Service. A denial of service attack is when an attacker floods your network with requests. I want this, I want that, I want this. And now all of a sudden there's a queue of hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of requests in that queue. So for your legitimate request to get out, let's say to Google, well, that one will take a lot longer if there wasn't 10,000 before you. You follow me? So it slows everything down to a crawl by just force feeding in a ton of requests. Once again, a DOS attack. When you turn these on, they act as like a digital watchdog to not allow specific requests to go in. Also, they put a time gating on it too. So if the attacker was to do a request now, they wouldn't be able to do the exact same request like a millisecond apart and just constantly flood the network. They stop that from happening. So you want to go and enable that. That's usually in your security settings. Turn on, once again, SPI as well as DOS protection. The other thing you want to disable is DMZ. DMZ is something that is used, especially if you're a gamer, you know what it is. It's basically a demilitarized zone is what it stands for. And it allows you to open up the network to all traffic. That's a bad thing. And some people will do it. They're gamers. They're like, oh yeah, I just want to open it all up. I just want to just get good pings and whatnot. They DMZ the whole damn thing. And now anybody could just root basically into your router. You don't want to do that. So disable DMZ. That's very, very important. And disable port forwarding. You can do that once again in your security settings unless it's absolutely necessary. Some things need port forwarding. And if those things do, we'll only release or open up those specific ports, period. And once again, DMZ needs to be turned off completely. absolutely disabled. Now, the other thing that you should disable is UPnP. Now, that stands for Universal Plug and Play. That basically gives like IoT devices or any other type of network device that is on the network free communication. Once it's in the network, it is now open. It doesn't need to authenticate itself anymore. So they have this communication between device to device to device with no impairments, let's say, no security. So you want to turn off universal plug and play, or that UPnP, and that you can find over in the network settings. Make sure you turn that off unless there's some reason for you to enable it. Definitely disable it. The next thing that I have written down here, which is important that a lot of people just miss, is Wi-Fi, right? You want to make sure that WPS is turned off. Now, you don't need to know what it is. Basically, it's like an old school method of security, wireless. Go into your wireless settings, you'll see WPS. Just turn it off. It's like pin-based attacks go through it all the time. Turn WPS off. You do not need that on. It's once again old school. All the rest of these hardening techniques that I'm giving you will supersede that tenfold. Now, let me give you a few advanced techniques. Now, these aren't for the faint of heart, but you can use them and they are extremely powerful. The first one would be MAC filtering, MAC address filtering. This is extremely powerful. Now, what exactly is a MAC address to begin with? A MAC address, every device has a MAC address. Let's call it a name, its own name, an address. And these addresses are 12 characters long. They're hexadecimal characters. So you can have letters and numbers from 0 to 9, letters from A to F, and there are a series of 6, usually with a colon in between them. Maybe I'll put it right here so you can see it, or a dash in between them. Now, if you do the math on it, hexadecimal 12 to the 16th power, you're sitting at like just under 300 trillion possibilities, all right? So we're not going to run out of MAC addresses anytime soon. 300 trillion is a big number. So every device has its own MAC address. And with MAC address filtering, what you do is you lock down your network and you say only these MAC addresses can access the network. That's a good thing, right? That means nothing could get in unless you say it's okay. The bad part about it is now there's a lot of work that needs to go on, because if there is a new device, you now need to find out what the MAC address is of that device to be able to put it into the whitelist of this MAC address filtering system. Now, you could go and do this and enable it in your network settings, but for the most part, you're probably not going to want to do it because it's something that you're going to have to stay on top of all the time. So if you get a new phone, for example, you're going to have to go into the phone, look up the MAC address, come in here and type in that MAC address so now the phone has access to your Wi-Fi network. Once again, this is for really advanced hardening, but it does the job because now nothing can get in unless you say so. And it's a device that you know is going to be on the network, not a random one of some guy pulling up to the side of your home and now breaking into your Wi-Fi, right? So the other thing that you want to be able to shut off is control from a remote access location. So control from remote access can happen. For example, if you want to turn this on because you want TP-Link to be able to like tunnel into your router to see what's wrong with it, for example. Or if you want to manage your router externally. Let's say you're out and about and maybe you're at a hotel room someplace, you need to get into your server for one reason or another. Giving you the ability to route into the router externally could be powerful, but it could be extremely dangerous. So I would shut this off unless you absolutely need it. Turn it on if, let's say, you have a security individual or you have someone that's going to be working on your network. You can turn that feature on. You go to System Tools, and that's where you could disable or enable that remote management feature. But if not, once again, turn that off. You don't need that on. Now, I put down a couple of like real world tips that some people know about, some people don't, and I think that it is important. A lot of people will stake their router in places that, well, everyone has access to. You really don't want to do that. especially if you have people coming into your office, for example. If you're in a home, well, you kind of know who comes into your home for the most part. But if you're in an office setting, you don't want your router someplace that everyone can see. You want it inside of a lockbox, right? Or you want it on the other side of a wall someplace that now the regular folk that are sitting in the waiting room can't see it. So you want to kind of obscure your router. You don't want people to be able to plug into or have physical access to. All right, that's very important. Also, what you want to do is go through your logs. Your router will produce log files. You need to turn it on in your network settings, but it'll produce log files, and it will log every time that there is a request, for example, at the administration panel to get in. It'll be like, oh, look at this. We tried getting in as an administrator 10 times yesterday. And you're like, wait a second, I'm the administrator. I didn't try getting in 10 times. Now you know there's something going on. All right. You need to fortify because someone is trying to break into your router. So looking at those logs is very important. There are other tools out there like Nmap, the letter N and then map, or Wireshark, or there's a bunch of them. Okay, and these tools could be used, they're free, to do network analysis, to do analysis in such a way to see where the vulnerabilities are. I personally like Wireshark, does a pretty good job. Nmap is nice too. If you're using Linux, it's sitting on there all the time anyways. It's nothing to install, you can use it. And you're basically monitoring packet level, right? You're taking a look at what's going on, where's the traffic going, what port is it going to, what is going on at any given time. So you can use that. If you don't know how to use that, that's fine. Default to your security professional, all right? The other thing that you can do is reset your SSID. A lot of people will do this. You go by someone's house, right? And you look on your phone and all of a sudden it'll say TP-Link 0138. So now we know that this home is using TP-Link. So if I'm a hacker, I'm gonna be like, okay, let me look at my logbook of how to break into a TP-Link router, right? Always change the SSID. The SSID is the name of your router. Change it. Don't leave it the same. I should have put that at the top of the list. Change the name just like you change the number, right? Your IP address of the router. Change it. It's very important. Make it something obscure. Make it no hackers allowed in like crazy characters like this. Okay, do something like that. All right, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. And then finally, keep learning. Just like what you're doing right now, learning different tips and tricks and techniques on how to harden your router. I just gave you a few. All right, I'm a system administrator. There's a lot that I do that's deeper than this, especially when it comes to Cisco and fiber channel switches and whatnot. The bottom line here is learn, always learn. You continuously learn what are the new techniques, what are the new tips out there, what is the new ways, let's say the new ways of breaking into a router, and then you can circumvent them. Maybe there is simply a firmware update that came through the pipe that is actually a bad firmware update that opens up. Let's say it turns DMZ, demilitarized zone, onto your entire network like we talked about. It's an accident. Let's say that happened. Well, you're going to just simply take older firmware and flash your router with that older firmware, and it's going to take away this vulnerability, once again, because it's the older one and not the new one that has that problem built into it. So once again, this is just a few tips and tricks. If you have any others that you want to share, that's always great. Down below in the comment area, I want to hear from you. What do you do? Also, I want to know, are you going to stick with TP-Link or are you going to get rid of them and pick up a new router? Some people are looking for an American-based router. TrendNet, for example, is one that I know. I think they're made in Texas. There are some routers that are made in the US. Some are made in other countries that you might be more happy with in comparison to China, which is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. Like I said before, when I read that short little piece, that short article, they are mandated by the CCP to follow their rules and laws to give them all of the information that they want continuously. And if there is something that they want them to do, they are beholden to the CCP or the PRC, which is your People's Republic of China. They are beholden to them. All right. So having a communist party controlling your data basically is problematic. And that's what the US is saying as of right now. Now, will TP-Link be banned in the US? Maybe not. I don't know. I've recommended them for years. And I think that they're great routers. They do a fantastic job and they're very cheap. But being very cheap puts them in a lot of households and a lot of businesses and a lot of military locations also. And that is the problem. That is the major problem. All right. And that's one of the things that they were saying. These routers are simply too cheap. If a router is $200 from this company in the US, TP-Link does it for $100. Well, it's half price and you're going to go with the TP-Link. And that's what they were doing. They were saying that they're becoming monopolistic because of their pricing structure. And they say that this is a problem. So we'll see what ends up happening. But what say you? Down below, I want to hear from you. And if you're shy, you don't want to put something down there, I understand. Put an emoji down there. Any emoji. At least I know that you got to the end of this video. I would really appreciate it. Also, if you enjoy the content, throw it a thumbs up. That's very helpful. Tell your friends, family, colleagues about it. Share it. Share it with your community. If you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. If you have, thank you. I appreciate that. Click this little notification button over here so when I go live or when a new video comes out, you'll be notified of it immediately. And if you haven't downloaded any of my ebooks, take a look at them. Go to JCristina.com/books. Matter of fact, the prelude to this book, How to Create a Digital Fort Knox, Backing Up Your Digital Life. You can find that there, along with some other ebooks that are free to you. Once again, JCristina.com/books. And if you want to say thank you for all of my hard work, there's a little thank you button. You can click on that, give $1 or $2 if you like. That would be appreciated. But if not, it's perfectly fine. The video is still free. Consider becoming a member of the channel. That would be even better. And finally, head over to my website, JCristina.com, where you can find all the photography tools I've invented for you and me over the many years, and hopefully there's something there that you might like. And if there is, please pick it up and support me and my family. Check out my merch, my teas, my books, and everything else over there. Many blessings to you and your family. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, stay secure, and we'll see you in the next one. Love y'all.